So welcome to the show, Alan. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Tim.
And you are the author of the political thriller book, The Eagle and the Cockerel, and you've got a selection of interesting books, not all political, but you've got a great selection of books today, Alan.
Yes, thank you, Tim. So there are a couple of picks that are political, and some others are not political, but they betray my Italian roots. I grew up in Italy, so a couple of choices are books written by Italian writers. And the first, shall I go with the first?
No, I'm gonna beat you to it. So shall we talk about the first book? Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
sorry.
Here we go. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Assuming that's the first you're going to talk about. So
yes. That's the kind of book I've read it more than once, and every time I believe, how can you write it? And it's surprising because it took 2 years, apparently just 2 years to write it, but I'm a bit suspicious because the second book, this was the debut novel by Umberto Eco, and to write the second one, it took 8 years. So I assume that maybe it took him 2 years to write The Name of a Rose, which is quite a bulky book. But he had gathered throughout his career. He was a professor of medieval science. He was a philosopher, and he wrote a book when he was 50 years of age. And it's reassuring for me. I wrote my debut novel at the age of 45, so I'm still on time based on of this wonderful benchmark. And it's a mystery set in an Italian monastery in the 14th century. So you have everything here. You have the mystery. Even the title name, the Name of a Rose, it's unclear why it is called this way, because there is no reference within the plot or the book itself. There is no reference about roses. It was said that it's called The Name of a Rose because rose is the most common symbol throughout literature, history. So maybe it's for this reason, but it's a story that has everything: history, religion, philosophy. It's a very creative. It has a very creative plot, and I don't want to spoil it. And they made a movie out of it with a great Sean Connery acting as the main character, William of Baskerville, in 1980. So by and large, when the book was published. So it's my favorite book, not just because the author is Italian, but because it can really include so many facets and so many areas of knowledge. So it's of course recommended. It's not easy. It takes some time, but it's a great book, and it's still very current in my opinion in terms of the capacity of writing with such a skillful approach.
Okay, and this is a book that you both like for its kind of intrigue and the rest of it, and that it's an Italian author. I guess it's kind of hits both your.
You can feel that Professor Eco, as he was known in Italy, he died unfortunately, I think, a couple of years ago or even more.
Yeah.
He could. How can I say? He had such a knowledge because he was a philosopher, a semiotic, or semioticist. I don't know how to say. So somebody who specializes in symbols. He was one of the biggest experts of medieval history, and you can feel that he took a lot from this giant knowledge. And he had a library of 10,000 books, and I thought, as he read all these 10,000 books, and during one interview, he said, "I hate people when they ask me if I read 10,000 books." So I felt a bit dumb on that occasion. It's one of my favorite books. I don't read books more than once very often.
Yeah.
This book probably at least 3 times I read it, both in Italian and the English translations, because I like to see how words are translated, how contexts are translated. So I read it in both languages.
Okay. Shall we go on to the next book?
I'm ready.
Right, here we... The Baron in the Trees by Italo Calvino.
Calvino. I'm challenging you with this. No,
Italian.
another Italian bloke,
Yeah.
and he grew up in my region. He's famous internationally and of course nationally, but he grew up in my region. I grew up in a region on the sea next to France called Liguria, and the capital is Genoa, but he's mostly famous for, he's also famous for Portofino, Cinque Terre. It's quite a touristic spot. And Italo Calvino grew up there, and I think it's not randomly that this book is set in a fictional town in Liguria, and it's a genial idea. And it's a genial idea because the author created a fictional dimension. The book tells the adventures of an 18th century boy from a noble family, and after quarreling with his parent, this child decides to climb up on a tree, and he never returns back, and he spends his whole life walking on this clearly fictional thick expanse of branches and trees. And you would say, what a dull life in a way, but it's not true, because there is everything in human encounters, of course his relationship with nature, but I mean it takes quite a skill, a capacity as a writer. I'm a writer, so I'm always making comparison and trying to get inspiration from other writers, but it's a short novel, but it's probably 60 or 70,000 words, so still a novel, and it's greatly written, and it's probably his best novel, even if Italo Calvino has a quite wide range of books published. And funny enough, the fictional town in Liguria, my region, is called Dombrosa, which in Italian it means shaded, shady. A very appropriate name, given that there is this thick expanse of trees and branches. And as I said, I mean, to create this kind of dimension, which is what I'm trying to do with my second novel, it's in the making. I think it is challenging, but if you can achieve it, it's rewarding. So it's a masterpiece, and in my opinion, this is one of the authors that would probably have deserved a Nobel.
Yeah.
And because of the variety of his catalog and his great skills. And he shared the same at school. His closest friend was a man who then became a very important journalist and philosopher in Italy, Eugenio Scalfari, who died a couple of years ago. So brilliant people tend to grow up close.
Yeah.
So I recommend this. I recommend, of course, all the books in my list. But I think it's interesting for someone who lives in the UK or as English as a main language to see how foreign writers write, and is a great one.
Yeah. So you recite, is this another one where you read it in Italian and you also read it in English, or have you just read this in English?
I think I read in both languages, and yeah, as I said before, I like to read in both languages and see the differences. And I like because it's a playful tone in a way, but there is a hidden meaning. I mean, this person who decide to abandon life as most of us conceive it. So with having a normal house, a job, and it's a bit like a Peter Pan, kind of lifestyle. And I don't want to spoil the end, but I can just say that the end is consistent with the whole book. But I'm not going to spoil it because it's a very curious, it's a very interesting ending to this masterpiece.
Okay, should we go on to the next book, which isn't by an Italian author? So.
No.
1984 by George Orwell. So,
yeah, a bit of a tribute to George Orwell. I'm both an Italian and UK citizen, so I need to make everybody happy. And
Yeah.
by being a political writer, at least my first book is a political thriller. The second one will be different. I owe this tribute to a master of political fiction. And I as I told you before, I think political fiction is a bit neglected as a genre. And I don't include spy stories in political fiction. I think it's different what I mean. And people always mention George Orwell, and for me it was a tough choice between 1984 and Animal Farm, and I love them both. I decided to go for 1984, maybe because you have it's not just the political meaning of this novel. There is also, in my opinion, an introspection of a character, and you can see that it was written while Orwell was ill, and he decided to stay by himself, segregated on a Scottish island, and he wrote the book inside this White House all by himself. And he wrote a couple of letters to, I think he's probably his publisher or his agent, and he was excited about this book, even if 1984 got the recognition that has now later on. So when Orwell passed away, unfortunately, and nowadays it's everybody mentioned 1984. I think it's one of the most popular books, and is read everywhere. Even it's funny enough because when I look at Goodreads, for instance, these classics, I think they're more controversial in terms of rating and reviews than books which are clearly commercial, published nowadays, because those authors who are still alive, they have a huge fan base that properly promote them through Goodreads, while the classics are heavily scrutinized. So if you look at 1984 on Goodreads, I think it's a high rating, but not as high as I would have expected. And Orwell is not just these two books. He wrote other books also about writing, and it's an impressive catalog for Orwell too. But the two main political books are 1984 and Animal Farm.
Yeah, well, you used to be able to, in fact, I used to be able to get both of them on Audible as audiobooks, both at the same time. There's a big single credit on Audible, but I don't know if that's still true.
It's
But
a bundle.
yeah, it is still a fantastic book, and ironically, seems to be becoming more relevant again. There was a long period of time when it didn't seem to be as relevant, but now, with obviously what's happening in the world, 1984 seems to be becoming relevant again in terms of descent into kind of dictatorial and all this double think and all the rest of it. It's like we were at war with these people 5 minutes ago, but now we're not at war with them. We're at war with the other people, and all that kind of stuff in 1984.
I mean, it's not cheerful reading. If you want something to uplifting, it's probably not the right book for you. No. But it's a quite you feel you're brought into this kind of void, right?
Yeah.
So and I can see it was written while he was close to his death. Unfortunately, he wasn't feeling well, and of course, 1948. It's the year when it was written, and of course, the scars of the war could still be felt.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite novels, so I had to include it in this list, even if it was a tough call with Animal Farm.
Yeah, well, I would both if you'd asked, but I think it's good that you chose one in a way, because now we know.
Yeah.
And you also managed to mention Animal Farm, which is also a crackingly good book as well. So. Anyway, should we go on to the next book?
I'm ready.
Right. Pereira Maintains by Antonio Tabucchi. Apologies
Tabucchi.
for my Italian pronunciation.
No problem. Back to my Italian roots. So
Yeah.
this is one of the first books I read, I believe, as a teenager. It was published in 1994. So guess my age. No, I'm joking. And it's the author is Italian, but the book is set during the Portuguese dictatorship of Salazar, 1938 in this case. And it's what I like it's told in the third person, a bit like if it was the transcript from a trial, of a deposition in a trial. So it gives you the idea, and this is the connection with 1984 of oppression, of censorship. And it's a story of this man, middle-aged man, who is the editor of a culture page for a second-rate kind of evening newspaper in Portugal, and he needs somebody to help him writing obituaries so that they are read if somebody dies, which is a bit ominous,
Yeah.
And he finds this youth, this I think journalist is in his 20s, freelance journalist in his 20s, and while reading these obituaries that are not, you will never be able to publish them because they are clearly leaning towards the left. He gets the opportunity to know the journalist Mariano, this young journalist, better, and he discovered that he's an activist, left-wing activist, and he's dragged in. The protagonist is dragged in, and he compromises himself politically. I'm not spoiling the story. And see, there is a connection with 1984, which is clear, even if the book was published in 1994, so almost 40 years later. And you must know that in Italy, because of the fascist period of 20 years, it's still a very soft nerve.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everywhere, but if you, as a country, you endure the dictatorship in a recent times, of course, it's always a soft spot. But the book gained global recognition, and I found an article. I don't know why it's dated 2010 on The Guardian, because I must assume that the English translation was published much earlier than 2010, and he praises this book, and of course I agree with them. And I like, as I said, I like the idea. He keeps saying Pereira maintains, Pereira declares, like if he was indicted.
Yeah.
And it's a short book. I think it's probably 30 or 40,000 words, so it can be probably read in one night.
Yeah.
And it's a page turner. And that's why I like it. And they made a wonderful movie in Italy with Marcello Mastroianni, who was a great Italian actor who passed away many years ago, and he was one of Fellini's favorite actors. And so I recommend both the novel and the movie.
Okay.
Even this is not called Movie Chat Live.
No. Well,
You should have also
funny
a show
enough,
about movies.
Funny enough, I was thinking that last week because I could do it, but I'm like, I've already got more live shows and podcasts than I should probably be doing.
I love also vintage movies. In London we are lucky. We have so many cine clubs, as they call them in France, in Italy, where you can watch old movies. Sometimes even with a old film, rolling film, 16 millimeters, and it's a joy. I think watching a movie on your home screen is not the same unless it's a huge one with stereo and so on.
Yeah.
It's not the same of watching a movie at a movie theater.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we go on to the next book? Well, I'm still doing book chat live.
Yeah, why not?
Right. Here we go. Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro.
Yes, we're moving to the Japanese.
Yeah.
Actually, it's British, but with clear Japanese roots. And it was awarded. This is the first book. It was published. I don't know when, 2010, or it's recent in a way, or maybe later. It was the first book published after he was granted the Nobel Award,
Yeah.
and it's set in the future, and shortly the story of a genetically engineered, sorry guys,
Yeah.
child. So in a way, robot, and who sees life from a shop, the window of a shopping mall. So it's a very narrow kind of opening, but she's very sensitive, and I love the naivete of this robot, and she's then picked as a gift, chosen as a gift by a child, and she becomes the tutor of this child, and for the first time ever, she leaves the shopping mall, and she understands human life, she understands how children behavior, she understands the dynamics of a family up to a certain extent. So I like that sometimes she believes that one thing has been said for a reason, why it has been said for another, and but which is understandable because she has always lived in a shopping mall. And you have two sides. You have a very introspective side, an inner journey, a human side in this story, and then you have the sci-fi, the artificial intelligent background. And I think if an author can mix these two aspects, as one so distant from the other, so the inner journey with a sci-fi component, with such skill as Ishiguro did, I think he deserves a Nobel, even if his book was the first after the Nobel was granted. I'm a big fan of Ishiguro, and I think I like his variety, because great authors, they don't repeat themselves, so they have a huge choice in their catalog, in their portfolio, I don't know how to call it. And it's a source of inspiration for me. This is what I'm trying to do with my books. I'm trying to have different layers that they can meet and enrich. One will enrich the other. And in this case, maybe is greatness is given by the fact that he's multicultural.
Yeah.
Because he has Japanese roots. And I'm curious to see. Well, I don't know if he's publishing anything soon, but it's one of the greatest of our century. And this book, it was successful. I also like the artwork. I don't know if it's here or upstairs. That's the problem when you keep books everywhere.
Yeah.
But the artwork is this reddish cover with the sun.
Yeah.
It's a minimalist kind of artwork, and I mean, many great books, they have great covers, starting from, I don't know, The Great Gatsby or Clockwork Orange. I mean, they become iconic not only for the content but for the artwork, and this book has a artwork up to the expectations, and I recommend it. And I think they are making a movie, or I don't know if it's made or is they're doing it right now. I think it would make for a great movie.
Yeah.
So if it's out there, I haven't watched it. I will watch it, and hopefully I will be happy.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you into sci-fi? What is your favorite genre? Sorry.
Oh, well, probably I would say sci-fi. The funny thing is though that I am very much more watch sci-fi and film and TV.
Okay.
Because I love fantasy, both fantasy and sci-fi, but the very, very long books that you tend to get, I can find off-putting. So,
Years to read them.
yeah. Anyway, shall we go on to the next book, which isn't sci-fi, and it's not by an Italian author. So,
No, it's
Old
really
Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. I don't know. What did I miss? The Old Man and the Sea.
the
Apologies.
old man of the sea. Don't worry,
Yeah.
we still love you. No, jokes aside,
Yeah.
I grew up on a seaside town in Italy, and this was probably one of the first books I read as a child. It's a short book. I mean, it's 25,000 words. I don't usually measure books just in terms of words, of course, but
Yeah.
the size matters, especially if you read it as a child or as a young teenager. And this book, I love it because you feel the distance of this man. He's an old fisherman, and he lives in the Cuban Sea, in an island around Cuba, and you can feel the distance from everything. And he starts this struggle to fish merlin fish, and he's on his dinghy or a very small boat by himself. So it's a solitary journey. I like solitary journeys, and and I don't want to spoil it. I suspect that most viewers have read this masterpiece, but let's say that his struggle is not entirely rewarded, or it's temporarily rewarded. And these books probably gained Hemingway the Nobel Award because he had long deserved it, but this book, which was very successful in terms both of critic and the public, probably gained him the Nobel Award. And he was in poor ill conditions. He would die shortly after, so maybe they rushed the Nobel the guys in Sweden. They probably rushed to and grant him this award. And you can see that there is an entire career behind him. Uh, Hemingway was very generous also with writing tips. And one of these tips that I tend to follow as a writer is that the tip whereby if you, I mean, drop a writing session when you still have something to write, and possibly sleep over it, and possibly with margaritas or red wine, like
Yeah.
I don't recommend necessarily this last bit of a tip, but I think it's good because if you still have something to write which is brooding inside yourself, it can still grow if you sleep over it or if you allow some time. And for writers, the challenge is always not leaving the page blank. So even if for some it's easier, for some it's more a struggle. This is a very, very clever tip of
Yeah.
leave some ink in your pen. You go do something else, and then you come back. And Hemingway was why some authors are more famous than others. I think in the case of Hemingway, and it's the same case of Shakespeare, you have books that follow both their personal journey, but also the journey of the outside world. So if you look at Hemingway, one book, Farewell to the Arms, is concerning his war experience. Then you have other books concerning when he went to Spain for the Civil War as a reporter. This book clearly testifies to his last period when he was living in Cuba.
Yeah.
And I think, and with Shakespeare, I was watching a couple of documentaries recently, it's the same. You have books linked to his personal life, sorry, book in this case, plays linked to his personal life, but also influenced by what was happening outside. And with Shakespeare, he had the goal of make the rulers of the moment happy, the kings or queens
Yeah.
happy.
Well, naturally.
So
Yeah.
that was the political context of the time. While with Shakespeare, of course, it was the two world wars
Yeah.
that influence his writing. And this book is probably one of the best. It's shorter, it's less complicated in terms of plot, but it's straightforward and probably consolidated his fame as an author who wrote short periods, down to the point, very clear. It was a journalistic background, and
Yeah.
I see the same with Francis Scott Fitzgerald in a way. And I have a journalistic background. I'm far away from these gods of literature, but I think that the journalistic background allow you to be clearer, crisper, neater, short periods. While of course other major English writers, they were much more complicated in the way they wrote, like William Faulkner, for instance, or others. And so I wanted to end. My list is not ending and yet, but this is another masterpiece. I
Yeah.
assume that most viewers have read it because it's quite a
Okay.
requirement in
Yeah.
many
Well,
schools or
yeah. Not so much in England, I don't think. The
more.
US.
Italy, yes, for sure, and the US,
Yeah, in US, definitely.
yes.
uh, anyway, should we go on to the next book, which is may win a Nobel Prize? We never know in the future if you're very lucky. But it's by this amazing new author, The Eagle and the Cockerel by Alan Rhode, which is you. So this is your book.
Oh, yes. I'm showing the cover not for advertising purposes, but because
Oh
I
yeah,
like it. It's made by Nathan Burton, and
yeah,
it took me some time to persuade him to be on board on the project. He's one of the most famous in the UK. He designed the artwork for major successes and bestsellers, so I was proud that he was in. And it's a story that I wrote. It's a political thriller, a geopolitical thriller, and with all these elections going on, France, the UK, and then the European elections and the American elections in some months from now, is very current. It's a geopolitical thriller about a flamboyant and very ambitious French politician who has fell in disgrace because of a scandal. He was a former Paris mayor, and he comes up with an idea that saves his career, a referendum on a social media platform about the unification of France and Germany into a single superpower outside of the EU, because of course he wants to upset the status quo as much
yeah,
as he can. But it's not easy peasy because he has an opponent, a lady from Italy, a girl from Italy, who is a major news logger living in the UK, in Birmingham. So you have Paris versus Birmingham, and she's of Italian roots, and she's famous globally with her news blog because she's fighting fake news, and she abides to the strictest fact-checking rules. You know, the principle of fact-checking for her is a mantra, while for Vincent Damon, the French politician Vincent Damon, he's the guy who likes soundbite, who likes to twist reality, as it often happens with politicians nowadays. And it's two very different characters. Even their private life is, it couldn't be more different. So why I wrote this book? I wrote this book because there is an historic fact the German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer in 1951 proposed to an American journalist the unification of France and Germany into a single country. The European Union was still to come, but
Yeah.
he meant it because he repeated in another interview. It may shock our viewers, but you need to understand the context. Germany was on her knees at the risk of being dismantled by Allied force, and France was in tatters. So it made a sense. It was a way out, not his favorite way out, probably for Adenauer, and he was a very serious politician, traditional politician, old guard. So he spared his breath. He wouldn't have said something like this without believing in it. And so the story starts from this fact, which not many people are aware of. And then it's a very rich with twists. It's fast-paced, racy. It's a page turner, and I'm not saying it because he's my child, but that's quite a feedback I receive. So I cannot recommend this book because I would be too biased. I can tell you it took me 2 years to write it. The idea actually came to me in 2015, but then for personal reasons I had to quit. And then in 2020, I said it's now or never. I wanted to bring my life to a next level. And so I didn't give up this time. And the hardcover was published in May 2023, while the paperback was out on the 27th of June, all around the UK and Europe. And needless to say, it would make for a great series or movie, I think.
Yeah.
And every chapter, it's set in a different place. It has its own life, has a life in itself. And I did it on purpose. And you see these two characters going towards the referendum and struggling for different reasons. Miss Cliché, the news vlogger, Lucia, she has more personal issues about how she's spending her life because she's focusing on just on her vlog and on this fight for Europe's survival, while Vincent is more, I think his political ambitions are at the center of his thoughts, and he sacrificed everything for his political goal, and its personal ambition is probably driving his political goal.
Yeah.
And that's my feeling with many politicians nowadays. Ambition has predominant role, and there is no longer much political credo or ideologies or
Principles. Yeah.
principles, let alone.
Yeah.
You can find really, it's funny, especially in Italy now. Now I follow Italian politics every day. You can hear the same politician say A one day and then twisting, and it becomes Z in 3 months, just because the people have changed mood in the meanwhile, which is scary because I understand you need votes, you need popularity, otherwise you will be unable to govern your country or to gain power. But there must be a limit.
Mm.
I mean, the politicians, they must, in a way, be inspired by the people, but also inspire the people. And so we have a bit of an issue nowadays, even with the latest two elections in the UK and France surprised us again. I mean, in 2016, Trump and Brexit, I think, surprised almost everybody. These two latest elections, not the one in the UK, but especially the one in France, was very surprising because the press was calling Macron, they were thinking he was approaching his political end, which seems is not so close. But you never know. Politics is more surprising than books.
Yeah. Okay. So I usually ask guests two questions at the end after we talked about the books. The first question is, if you met somebody like totally on the street somewhere, what kind of decision tree, or if you had to give them one of these books, I mean, obviously there's one book you might want to give them anyway, but if you had to, like, what questions would you ask the person to determine which of these books you would give them? So, obviously there's your book, so I suppose you might.
I would really, I don't want to be too self-serving, so I would probably try to understand whether they are more plot-driven or character-driven. I'm very plot-driven. I like the plot. I like thick plots, but also with a surrounding, an historical surrounding or an emotional component. And all my books are quite plot-driven. So I would try to understand if they are more plot-driven and character-driven. So if they are plot-driven, I would probably recommend, I don't know, The Name of a Rose.
Yeah.
If they were more character-driven, I would probably go with Klara and the Sun, because all the other books are clearly plot-driven. Klara and the Sun is the one where the character and plot are balanced 50-50.
Yeah.
Or probably the character is 60-40. So I would go for I would try to understand whether the person I'm speaking to is more character or plot driven.
Yeah, okay. And the other question I ask, which I kind of know the answer to because I asked you this in the last show, but what have you got in terms of new books coming out? I know you're working on one book, but like, are you gonna do any more political thrillers, or are you gonna do different genres? Kind of like
the second book
next?
I'm writing right now? It's in the future.
Yeah.
It's in a world where humans are living only indoor. It's a society, so it's a dimension. What I was saying about the Baron on the trees, I am creating a dimension, and the underlying topic is probably the environment and what's happening. So political thrillers, I have other ideas about books on politics, but they will not be close to the Eagle and the Cockerel. And some people already are asking me if I'm thinking of a sequel for the Eagle and the Cockerel. And I say no, because my goal is to write 10 books before the age of 65, as I told you. And I want to prove to myself that I can diversify. So at this stage, no. And I'm not a big fan of sequels because in most cases there is a commercial reason. In some cases, you have, especially movies, you have good sequels, I must say. But so the next book is going to be in the future. It's going to be plot driven, but I'm trying to bring somebody not only of myself, but to make people think. That's my goal as a writer, to give people some food for thought. And so even for this second novel, I think we will be able to think about the environment. Readers will be able to think about the environments when they read the book. And I'm halfway through. I'm really, really trying to get the book out by the end of next year.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, I'm working every day on it, and I have my pattern every day. Let's see.
Yeah.
Cross your fingers.
So, the next book after that, you're not a fan of writing a series of books, then? So the next
I don't
book
like
after that will be something totally different again. Is that true?
Yes, it will be a book where the underlying topic will be mental health. That's my idea right now, but I don't want to spoil it and I don't want people to steal the idea. So it's going to be a joke. I'm ironic. But the underlying topic will be mental health.
Yeah. And how do you write? I mean, there were two schools of thought with writing, well, at least in fiction. There's the plotters, people who plot out the book beforehand and then write the manuscript afterwards, and what they call pantsers, people who write the seat of their pants. They just write it as go. Well, do you plot out your book beforehand, or are you just very much you write it as you go, seat of the pants style?
I usually have 5 or 6 key points. So
Yeah.
a starting point. The starting point is very important for me, I think, and it's very important in general for readers.
Yeah.
And also, I usually know the end. I know a couple of twists. I know some lines of a book, but the 80% of the content comes out while I'm writing.
Yeah.
I cannot conceive writing a book in advance. Also because in theory, every page is filled with ideas. So my method is having milestones, and then I connect the dots throughout the writing process.
Yeah. Well, personally, I never. When I was writing books, I needed to have the ending because it's so easy to get lost in the middle, just like what's on.
I mean, it's easy to lose yourself within. I mean, to get lost within the writing process.
Yeah.
Because you're all by yourself. Especially if you have just started writing, you have a lack of trust in yourself, which is normal. So that's why there is this thriving industry about helping writers to establish their own process and patterns. I think it takes for quite a will, strength of willpower to write a book. It's a marathon for sport. If as a metaphor, I would say it's a marathon.
Yeah.
Definitely not a sprint. It's a marathon.
Okay. So that would that be your main piece of writing advice to anybody who sees this and thinks, oh, I want to write a book if I'm off.
Writing every day.
Yeah.
Give you a target. It doesn't mean writing, but if you are doing research, if you have a background, but do something every day so that you're never in the same position of a previous day.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show. And if people want to get in touch with you to talk to you about your current book or your future books or writing or anything, and they want to talk to you about Italian authors, how can they get in touch with you?
They can find me. I have a website, which is Alan. How do you call it? Rhode.com. I mean, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and there is my own personal website. So I'm easy to find.
Yeah, I think you can just type Alan Rhode author.
Yes,
we find you. So, well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm going to start hitting buttons and hopefully end the show in various places now. So, thank you for everybody watching.
Bye. Thank you.